At exactly midday ship time, the doors to the Galactica Interspecies Academy cafeteria whooshed open to the usual bustle of scent clouds, luminescent trays, and polylingual chatter. Conversations rippled in at least 87 dialects, interrupted only by the low hum of digestion vents and the occasional clatter of bio-cutlery. And then everything stopped. Nate Reynolds walked in, holding something that instantly suspended a room full of species who'd never agreed on anything, not even what counted as food, into one collective, instinctive gasp. It was smooth, speckled, roughly the size of a mid-range plasma core. Tucked under Nate's right arm like a football, it looked absurd against his standard-issue Academy uniform. But the thing that truly stopped all motion was that it looked exactly like a Drakari egg. He strode in like nothing was wrong, walked right past the two Urinx twins who'd been comparing photos of their molting, past the Dirthan choir group humming in perfect electromagnetic resonance, past a Grolm priest quietly blessing her kelp noodles. He arrived at the long shared table at the center of the cafeteria, an intentional symbol of unity between species, and plopped the thing down like it was a brown-bagged lunch. A tray dropped, soup sloshed. A Tavari student siphoning tendrils froze mid-slurp, dripping purple broth onto the floor. "Is that?" hissed someone in Drulic. "Oh, stars, is that a child?" Another voice stammered, this time in translated galactic standard. The egg sat there innocently. Slightly wobbled, and then Nate sat down next to it, looked at it with a grim sort of resolve, and said, "Welp, let's get this over with." Whispers exploded. One Silvari student immediately ducked under the table, shielding her pudding. A logic-based intelligence named HX 440 amperes swiveled its sensor dome to a full 135 degrees. Nate gave the egg one last contemplative glance, then without warning lifted it and cracked it hard against the table's edge. The sound it made was like a fruit dropped from orbit. Yellow yolk gushed, viscous, shiny, clinging. The stench hit a half-second later. Rich, earthy, unmistakably raw. Nate didn't flinch. He pulled the cracked shell apart with both hands like a deranged breakfast-themed magician. And then he drank. In one massive, determined gulp, he upended the contents. The entire cafeteria watched in paralyzed horror as a quart and a half of slimy, semi-translucent liquid disappeared into the lone human's body. It dripped from his chin. A bubble popped audibly somewhere in his throat. He finished, smacked his lips, and belched. "Ugh," he coughed weakly, wiping his mouth with a sleeve. "Tastes like regret." Then he turned green. Screams erupted. The Silvari ethics student who had been hiding popped up, took one look at the half-destroyed shell, and immediately started wailing. "You can't eat babies of other races." Professor V's reptiloid biology chair and one of the Academy's oldest faculty members had just emerged from the staff buffet line, holding a plate of sun-dried Tharnian roots. He took one look at the dripping shell, one look at Nate's pale, sweating face, and fainted so hard he did a full spiral on the way down. Somewhere, an emergency peacekeeper alarm blared to life. A Grolm priest, shaking, clutched her ceremonial tongs and began chanting last rites. "I didn't it's just an ostrich egg," Nate wheezed. "Earthbird, non-sentient, kinda a dare." But no one heard him. He coughed again, then promptly doubled over, gripping his stomach. "I think I need a bucket." The next moment, he was on the floor, groaning. The medical team arrived less than a minute later. Not out of efficiency, they had been pre-alerted via the cafeteria's predictive chaos algorithm. They arrived in full hazard gear, two medics dragging an auto gurney, another shouting for species protocols. "Nobody touch the fluid," one barked, pointing to the yolk splatter. The cafeteria had already cleared itself with military-level speed. One brave Tavari had tried to record the incident on a neural node before being yelled at by 3 professors and an ethics advisor. Nate lay curled up, knees to chest, trembling, nauseous and pale. His eyes blinked rapidly, lips slick with egg slime. "He's contaminated," muttered one medic. "Species unknown. Could be Drakari spawn. Could be worse. We'll need full gastric scans, parasite screening, possibly a diplomatic lockdown." "I told him it was a bad idea," groaned a human voice from the crowd. It was Juno Park, one of the only other Earthborn stationed on the lunar campus. He saw some old video about bodybuilders slamming raw ostrich eggs for protein and said, "Watch me." The medics wasted no time. Nate was loaded onto the gurney, strapped in, IV already prepping. The last thing he saw before the cafeteria ceiling blurred was Professor V's being loaded into a second gurney, muttering something about genetic war crimes and embryonic atrocities. Then, Nate passed out. He woke hours later in the Medwing's Isolation Suite 3. The lighting was soft, filtered through calming amber fields. Beeping machines flanked his bed, monitoring vitals. A medical AI hovered silently nearby, its four arms moving in hypnotic precision. Juno sat in the corner, arms folded, still wearing her academy badge. "Hey, sleeping stupid," she said. "You're a galactic incident now." Nate groaned. "Feels like my intestines got into a fight with my pancreas and lost." "You swallowed a raw ostrich egg, Nate." "I was dared." It wasn't even refrigerated. A light knock at the door preceded the entrance of Dean Slorvax, amphibious, 6 foot tall, and dressed in ceremonial gray robes indicating official hearings. He looked like a cross between a toad and a lawyer, which was not far off. "Mr. Reynolds," he said in his liquid voice, "you stand accused of potential xenocannibalism, violation of campus harmony protocols, unsanctioned biological ingestion, and the triggering of an interspecies diplomatic alert. How do you plead?" Nate blinked. Full of salmonella?" Dean Slorvax sighed. "Medical tests are pending. You will remain under observation until your system clears any threats. In the meantime, the Interspecies Law Council will schedule a review hearing. Expect a full inquiry. Also," he handed Nate a piece of laminated plastic. It was a copy of the cafeteria rules. A single line had been hastily added at the bottom. "No consuming any item that resembles another student's young." Beneath it, a blurry still image showed Nate mid-slurp, yolk dribbling down his chin, eyes closed in agony. Nate turned to Juno. "Well, at least I'm famous?" "You're an idiot," she said. And then the medical AI calmly inserted another IV. The first 24 hours were a blur of fluids, fiberless meals, and deeply invasive scans. Nate had never imagined a day where he'd have to defend his intestines to a sentient jellyfish armed with a bioluminescent clipboard. But that's where he was by morning, head tilted back, sipping lukewarm rice broth through a straw, while the medical wing's species-neutral nutritionist reevaluated human gut fauna for the third time. "It's fascinating," said the jellyfish-like dietitian, a Dr. Vani named Kirkshell, adjusting its chromatophores to a concerned lavender. "Your stomach acid is far more corrosive than we anticipated. You should have been unconscious sooner." "I was," Nate muttered. "Multiple times, actually." Kirkshell waved a tentacle. "Only after your system tried to reject half a liter of raw avian fluid, and even then, it was more of a tactical surrender than failure." A nearby screen beeped. The results of the virotox panel were in, negative for parasites, interspecies pathogens, and most notably, Drakari genetic material. Kirkshell let out a satisfied ripple of colors. "Well," it said, "no diplomatic incident yet. But it was close. If the protein content had triggered a misidentification by the scans..." Nate groaned and clutched his stomach. "It was just an egg." "You swallowed it like a primordial swamp god," Juno chimed in from the corner, where she was now assembling what looked like a defense presentation. "I've got to prepare for the hearing. The last guy who violated dietary ethics got stuck in cross-cultural sensitivity training for 3 semesters. That seems excessive. He accidentally served fermented Grolm placenta snacks at a birthday party." Nate made a gagging noise and curled further into his blanket. The interspecies hearing was scheduled for the following day, and though it wasn't technically a trial, the lineup resembled one. 3 faculty members from diplomacy and interethics, 2 biologists, 1 culinary anthropologist, and a visibly nervous translation AI that stuttered every time it had to interpret something egg-related. Nate was wheeled in, still weak, his hair damp from cold sweats, wearing a light recovery robe that clung awkwardly to his elbows. "Let the hearing commence," announced Dean Slorvax from his central podium, his throat sacs inflated solemnly. "Mr. Reynolds, please state for the record what, in the name of orbital sanity, you were attempting to do." Nate cleared his throat, wincing. There's this old video from Earth. A guy drinks a raw ostrich egg for protein. It was kind of a meme. I thought it'd be funny. A Silvari ethics professor hissed audibly. You did this for comedy? No, I mean, yes, look, someone dared me. They said humans never eat anything unfiltered. So I figured, why not show them we're adventurous? I thought it'd be like cultural sharing. Several beings visibly recoiled. One sniffed the air and recoiled again. Professor V's, newly upright and heavily bandaged in cooling wraps, leaned forward. His voice was a dry rasp. You ingested what looked like a sentient species offspring in public for the sake of amusement? I didn't know Drakari eggs looked like that, Nate said quickly. To me it looked like a breakfast item. Breakfast? Someone gasped. Juno, thankfully, stepped in. She tapped her tablet, projecting a hologram of an actual ostrich alongside the egg. This is Struthiocamelus, a non-sentient earth bird, she explained, cool and composed. Ostriches are farmed for meat and eggs on Earth. The egg consumed was legally imported via nutritional protocols cleared under the Academy's cross-species dietary exchange program. The faculty stared. The ostrich on the hologram blinked, fluffed its feathers, and then took off running with absurd speed. Professor V's twitched. A Zentari biologist leaned in. That thing runs? Fast, very fast, Juno replied. The translation, AI, faltered. The Earth being eats its fast, non-talking feathered quadrupeds? Nate gave a weak thumbs up, only when cooked. The ethics chair visibly shuddered. Then why drink it raw? Because humans do dumb things to prove we're tough, Juno muttered. The room fell into a strained silence. Finally, Dean Slorvax exhaled through all 5 nostrils at once. Due to the non-sentient nature of the egg and confirmation of no ill intent, we will not pursue expulsion, he said slowly. However, effective immediately, a policy update shall be posted to clarify interspecies dining decorum. A new line blinked into existence on the central rule board, written in 10 major tongues. No eating anything that looks like another species young, regardless of actual sentience. Beneath it, Nate's face was posted pale, mid-gulp, looking like he regretted everything. Meeting adjourned, Slorvax said. By the time Nate returned to the medwing, the digestive cramps had mostly passed, but he was still pale and sore, nursing a mild fever and a heavy course of IV fluids. The medical AI warned him of potential bacterial overgrowth and had ordered stool samples for science. I can't believe I made the rulebook, he muttered to Juno as she passed him a sealed food tray. Inside was white rice, steamed root cubes, and a banana. This is your lunch now, she said. Forever. He sighed. Does it come with salt? No seasoning for a week. Also, your gut flora is now under interspecies observation. Apparently, your survival has intrigued several departments. Great, I'm a walking case study. You're also banned from bringing your own food into the cafeteria for the rest of the semester. Nate looked at the banana. What if I shaped one into a... Don't. Back on campus, the cafeteria had returned to relative normalcy. That is, if you ignored the new warning posters. The centerpiece was a large banner above the main entrance that read, Respect culinary boundaries, ask before you eat. Underneath was a cartoonish drawing of Nate holding an egg with a red X over it. The culture students added a skit to their orientation performances, reenacting the incident with exaggerated sound effects and a fake egg filled with glitter slime. Nate's character always vomited sparkles before passing out. For his part, Nate took it in stride, or tried to. The next time he entered the cafeteria, it was with a modest tray containing only toast, water, and that one sad banana. Students paused. A few chuckled, nervously. Professor V's, seated in the far corner, flinched at the banana's curve, then visibly relaxed when he realized it wasn't hatching. Nate sat down slowly. Very slowly. He peeled the banana. Every eye at the table watched. And then he bit it, normally. Chewed, swallowed. The room let out a collective sigh. Good to have you back, said a nearby Mran student with a nod. Yeah, Nate said, forcing a smile. No more Earth dares for a while. Juno slid into the seat beside him. You sure? I heard someone's offering credits if you snort horseradish. Nate looked like he might pass out again. 3 days after the hearing, Nate was released from the medwing under strict dietary restrictions, 2 courses of probiotics, and a stern warning. Any further ingestion of raw animal products will result in psychological evaluation and temporary relocation to the isolation dome. The warning was signed by 4 departments. He returned to classes, moving a little slower than before, walking like someone who'd just learned his internal organs were not to be trifled with. His color was returning barely, but there was a new wariness in his eyes, especially any time someone near him whispered the word egg. The nickname Ova Boy had already stuck in several languages. One particularly poetic Xentari student began calling him the swallower of unborn sons. I should have just made a salad, Nate muttered to Juno as they took their seats in Interspecies Diplomacy 201. He rubbed his stomach and winced. How long does this kind of thing stay in the galactic rumor pool? She glanced over her data tablet, half sympathetic. There's a grown song about it now. What? Something about yolk devouring and the fate of collapsing civilizations. It's surprisingly catchy. Professor Ethelux, a long-limbed, translucent being who communicated via harmonic oscillations, greeted the class with an unusual amount of energy. Today, he intoned, we'll discuss unintended cultural aggression, and, coincidentally, our very own Nathaniel Reynolds has agreed to provide a first-hand case study. Nate's face went white. I did what now? Don't worry, Juno whispered. You're educational now. A dozen projectors lit up, playing a now infamous clip from the cafeteria. Some kind soul had added dramatic orchestral music to the moment the egg cracked. Nate watched his own face twist into nausea in ultra-high resolution, larger than life. The camera caught every globule of yolk clinging to his lip. Note the reactions, Professor Ethelux said. Panic, ethical horror, species-level trauma responses, all triggered by the ingestion of a non-sentient protein. What can we learn? Nate raised a hand slowly. Maybe not to do it again? Ethelux gave a pleased chime. Exactly. Now, for comparative analysis, let's examine the Silvari practice of morning pudding. He mercifully moved on. But the damage was done. Nate's schedule quickly became a minefield of cultural mind blasts. In practical ethics, the instructor used him as an example during their symbolic acts and their interpretations unit. In biology lab, he was asked to describe Earth's avian reproductive strategy no less than 3 times. In culinary anthropology, his face had been pasted on the do not section of the edibility matrix, next to a Slarac student who once tried to deep fry their lab partner's medicinal slime. Worse yet, the student body now viewed Nate with a mixture of fearful reverence and morbid curiosity. He was the human who had consumed what looked like an imperial-class sentient egg and survived. To the Revox students, who prized strength through internal resilience, he was something of a legend. To the aquatic Molnari, who practiced ritual fasts to purify their conscience, he was a cautionary tale. And to one particularly enthusiastic carnivorous race called the Jarn, he was now addressed with the honorific, he who devoured potential. Do you want this to define your entire academic career? Juno asked one evening, catching Nate trying to hide behind a food printer in the study hall. I want to digest in peace, he groaned. You're going to need to redirect the narrative. How do I do that? Something so human, so weird, that it overshadows this. Weirder than chugging a raw ostrich egg in front of 60 alien species? She grinned. I have ideas. The plan began with a lecture. Specifically, a guest lecture offered by the Interspecies Psychology Department titled Human Risk Behaviors, The Omnivore's Dilemma. Juno pulled some strings to get Nate on the speaker list. He didn't love the idea of standing in front of 100 students with a stomach still not back to normal, but the opportunity to control the narrative was too good. He took the podium nervously, clutching a cup of plain tea and a printed copy of Earth's Food Pyramid. My name is Nate Reynolds, he began, voice shaky but audible, and I'm here to talk about how humans make bad decisions for very confusing reasons. A few beings nodded solemnly. On Earth, he continued, we eat things not just for survival, but for entertainment. Sometimes we light them on fire. Sometimes we dare each other to swallow them whole. We create contests about who can consume the hottest pepper or the most fermented fish in 5 minutes. A soft gasp rippled through the audience. To us, food is emotional, cultural, competitive. We eat because someone on the internet said we couldn't, and sometimes we regret it immediately. He pointed to the now frozen still of himself belching yolk. That was one of those times. Laughter. Real laughter. Even the translation AI added a smiling emoticon to its subtitles. For the record, Nate added, I didn't eat a sentient being. I ate something that looks like one to about half the galaxy, and for that, I'm sorry. Professor Ethelux, seated among the observers, tilted his crystalline head approvingly. A Jarn student raised her clawed hand. If you survive so much, poison are all humans designed like this? No, Nate said quickly. Some of us are just dumb. More laughter. He stepped down to modest applause, cheeks red, hands still trembling, but it felt like progress. Later that week, Nate and Juno were stopped in the hall by an AI unit who identified itself as part of the Cultural Integration Department. We are compiling a cross-species educational series on hazards of misunderstood cuisine, it said. You have been nominated to host. Host? Yes. We will feature various edible and non-edible items and your species' typical responses to them, including spicy noodles. Juno snorted. Nate considered this. Do I have to eat anything? Only if you wish to be upgraded to Tier 2 compensation. He turned to Juno. Is that hazard pay? She grinned. It means they'll pay you not to eat things. Nate nodded. I'm in. That evening, he returned to the cafeteria, not as a curiosity, but as someone tentatively accepted again. He approached the food replicator, considered, punched in a command. What emerged was a small tray of scrambled ostrich egg cooked, fluffy, seasoned, and a slice of toast. He carried it past students, who watched with quiet interest, sat down at a mostly empty table, and took a bite. Professor Weiss glanced over from across the room, flinched again but didn't faint. Progress. Nate smiled. This time, he said to no one in particular, I brought utensils. By the time the next cycle's term reports came out, Nate Reynolds was no longer known as the egg guy. At least not only that. Sure, his incident still lived on in footnotes, rulebooks, and a regrettably high-resolution holographic mural someone painted in the cultural wing stairwell. But now, he had other identifiers: guest lecturer, hazard cuisine, show host, official consultant to the cross-species cafeteria compliance committee. He even had an honorary badge issued by the Culinary Anthropology Club, certified edible ambassador, cooked foods only. Despite his intestinal setbacks, Nate had carved himself a niche, unintentionally, yes, but something stable enough to stand on. After weeks of forced bland meals, hydration therapy, and more lectures than his major required, he was finally cleared for gentle omnivorous reintroduction, which, according to the Academy medwing, translated to cooked vegetables, soft, cooked grains, room temperature, cooked meats thoroughly, legally, and ethically sourced, and, with cautious approval, scrambled eggs. Never raw, never whole, and never in front of a Dracari. Nate stood at the edge of the cafeteria that evening, holding his newest, safest tray to date: steamed rice, grilled tofu, an alien-adapted version, slightly purple, still good, and a sealed fruit gelatin cup. The banana had been temporarily replaced following a petition filed by Professor Weiss. He walked in with quiet confidence. No one gasped, no alarms were pulled. Look, whispered someone, he's got tofu now. That's character growth, another replied. Juno was already at the table near the atrium windows, working on a joint essay about species-specific humor across cultures. She gave him a nod as he sat. You know, she said, without looking up, some people do normal things to make friends. Nate sighed, stirring his rice. I didn't think drinking an ostrich egg would destroy diplomacy. She glanced at him. It nearly initiated an intergalactic custody war. Okay, yes, that was a miscalculation. He took a cautious bite of tofu, chewed, swallowed. No immediate digestive rebellion, a promising sign. Across the cafeteria, a group of grown students waved to him. One of them gave a thumbs up with 3 fingers. Nate returned it, cautiously. You've become a case study in at least 2 departments, Juno said. I heard the ethics students voted me most educational catastrophe. They did. He leaned back, smiling a little. At least no one thinks I eat sentient babies anymore. Juno raised a brow. Except the Jarn. They still consider you an honorary womb slayer. Great. Can't wait for that to show up on my internship resume. They sat in silence for a moment, letting the low murmur of multi-species chatter hum around them. Somewhere, utensils clinked against trays. A Tavari student passed by, balancing a stack of colorful fungi. The room felt normal again. Then, a familiar voice called out from the far corner. Reynolds! Nate turned, squinting. Professor V's stood at the faculty table, bundled in a high-collared academic robe, one hand carefully shielding his peripheral vision from Nate's plate. Yes, Professor? Nate called back, gently lowering his fork. V's voice trembled with age and repressed trauma. Have you finally learned that Earth biology is not a performance sport? Yes, sir. And that your digestive tract is not a proving ground for interspecies alliances? Very much, sir. V's exhaled, visibly relieved. Good. I'd like to stop seeing your scans on the Interdepartmental Digest. My colleagues think I collect human X-rays as a hobby. Nate winced. Sorry about that. V's gave a tight nod, then cautiously turned away, taking a long detour around the banana display before disappearing toward the faculty exit. Nate turned back to his tray. He's healing. He twitched less, Juno agreed. The following week brought the final stage of recovery, a mandatory debrief with a cultural liaison. Officially, it was listed as post-crisis reflective reprocessing. Unofficially, it was a polite way to make sure Nate wasn't planning to eat anything dangerous again. The liaison, a soft-voiced, owl-eyed therapist named Quema, met him in a cozy room decorated with photos of smiling students and food charts. So, Nathaniel, Quema said, folding their hands. Tell me, what did we learn? Nate sighed. That just because you can eat something doesn't mean you should. Quema nodded slowly. And what does that mean in an interspecies context? That perception matters, that a food can be harmless to me and horrifying to someone else, and that when you're in a cafeteria with 80 sentient species, you don't bring shock snacks. Excellent, Quema smiled. And how's your stomach? Mostly functional again, though the medwing has my colon on a watch list. Noted. The session concluded with a certificate that read, Cultural Awareness Milestone, Level 1, Avoiding Dietary Crisis. Nate slid it into his backpack, unsure whether to laugh or frame it. On the last day of term, he stood outside the cafeteria entrance, tray in hand, staring up at the now permanent banner. Ask before you eat. Respect cultural boundaries. His face was still there. The Academy had voted to keep it up not as punishment, but as a teaching tool. Beneath the cartoon image, someone had added a quote in flowing script. Adaptation is not just survival, it's learning to sit at the table together. It wasn't a bad line. Juno appeared at his side, balancing her own tray, which featured some sort of rainbow-hued flatbread and a mug of steaming algae tea. You look contemplative, she said. Just thinking about how fast things can spiral. 1 egg, 1 bite. And 2 weeks of bland food therapy. He shook his head. Still can't believe a breakfast dare almost made me an enemy of the state. You lived, you learned, you chewed. They stepped inside. No one gasped this time. No one screamed. Someone even waved and asked if Nate was bringing back the food show next term. He smiled and said, maybe. Depends on the menu. He sat down at his usual table. This time, the tray held only 1 egg. Scrambled. Fully cooked. With a little sprinkle of alien salt substitute that probably wasn't legal on Earth, but made everything taste like smoked cheese. He took a bite. Delicious. And most importantly, utterly uncontroversial. As the lunchtime buzz filled the room and the usual cafeteria chaos unfolded around them, Juno raised her tea in mock salute. To cooked food. Nate clinked his water cup against it. To not being a diplomatic hazard. They ate. They laughed. And for the first time in weeks, the food stayed down,